So our next presenter is Abigail Echo-Hawk, who is an enrolled member of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma. She has a master's in policy studies, and she's the Associate Director of Partnerships for Native Health at the University of Washington in Seattle, who's well represented today. In this role, Ms. Echo-Hawk works with over 100 American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and tribal organizations across Indian country to identify health research priorities and assist in creating policies to regulate research conducted on tribal lands. Throughout her career, she has advocated for policy and institutional changes to decrease health disparities in Native American infant mortality, as well as combat domestic violence and youth prostitution. She is the proud mother of 2 boys, Miguel and Antonio. Welcome.
Close it out. Right there. Slideshow. All right, let's use the computer. All right, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's recovering from a fabulous lunch at the cafe down there. That was really, really great and really expensive. But I like to contribute back to my community, so I'm glad to be here today. I was so excited to be invited to come and talk about some of the work that we're doing at the University of Washington, Partnerships for Native Health, where I'm currently the Associate Director. Our mission is to conduct community-centered research. That means that we are in true partnership with the communities that we work with. It's a reciprocal back and forth where they tell us how we can serve them, and then we do that to the best of our ability. We currently have 21 research projects in over 30 communities across the country, and we also do education and outreach on a variety of health topics. And this is a question, why research, that I had a hard time truthfully dealing with when I came into this organization. At the very basis of it, Native people experience some of the worst health disparities we heard everybody talk about: heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. One of the problems has been is that our voices haven't been present in the interventions that have come into our communities and that the federal government and the state governments has expected to work. Why is that? Native people have been researchers since time began. This is my son, Miguel, who she mentioned, and he is, at this point, he was 9 years old, and I had taken him back to Alaska. On my father's side, I am an enrolled member of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma. On my mother's side, I'm the granddaughter of Katie John from Mentasta Lake, Alaska. The headwater people of the Copper River, where I was in Alaska, is where I was born and raised. And as a child, I'd walk through the woods with my aunties and my uncles and my grandparents and my parents, and they would point out to me, this plant would, helps with constipation. This plant will soothe your tummy. And when I took my son back there, I took him to this particular birch tree, and I said, peel off the bark, chew on a little, it tastes a little like honeydew. And what I know and what I had grown up knowing was that particular bark would help you with a little bit of a headache. As I kind of went on in my career in my early 20s, I come to discover that the white birch that this branch comes from is actually what synthetic aspirin is based off of. We have been researchers since time began. We have been those who were shaping the health stories of our communities. And as Western culture permeated through our communities and was forced upon us, we began to have that told that our indigenous knowledge wasn't as important, that it didn't matter as much. And as a result of that, particularly around genetics research, we've heard a lot of talk about some of the historical things that have happened in our communities. That historical distrust has Native people not as willing to participate in research. There's a lack of knowledge on how we actually take these samples and what do these freezers actually look like that they're using. And in my travels throughout Indian country, I am privileged to spend time in different communities sitting down with elders, tribal councils, tribal health directors, allies within our communities. There is an absence of tribal research codes and oversight over genetics research. It creates a lot of concern. So this is one of my favorite stories from one of my relatives in Alaska. I remember the first time I met Malia several years ago, and she's like, what do you do? Well, I was like, well, I'm not a researcher. Well, I don't take that title as researcher because I go with the title that my community has given me, and that is as a storyteller of health. And so the stories that I get from health, they're coming from the research that is done in my community, and that's who I am. I'm a storyteller. And I come from a long line of storytellers from both my Pawnee tradition and my Athabascan tradition. My Uncle Fred John is one of my favorite storytellers. He's 71 years old. He is a boarding school survivor. He is a Vietnam vet. He's an amazing man who has lived through lots of different things. He grew up in Mentasta, Alaska, and at the time when he was about 4 years old, there's no road leading to that. There was a road about 13 miles away that the federal government and other people would drop things off at that then would be taken back into the village by dog sled. So at about 4 years old, the missionaries used to drop off these things we called missionary barrels because they literally came in these big barrels stuffed full of things that people in the lower 48 thought that Indians in Alaska would need. So a barrel had been dropped off at the top of the road. Somebody went and got it. It got brought into the village by dog sled, and they're going through it and passing out things to the kids and to the elders and to everybody, what was actually useful within those. And at the bottom of that barrel, there was a couple packages of something they just didn't really know or recognize. It was these little shiny glass objects, and they were inside this little, what he said looked like a little onion sack. And they had no idea what it was, but they were pretty, and they made this noise if you threw them up in the air. So they passed them out to the children as something to play with. A couple days later, he's been sent out by my grandma Katie to go get firewood, and he said he wasn't really paying attention. And so he walks down to our Fish Creek, which is in Mentasta Lake. It has a little bridge over it. It's about 30 below zero, and if you've ever been in the interior of Alaska at 30 below zero, it's cold and it's quiet. It's one of the most beautiful things you could ever see. He said he could hear every footstep crunching as he walked down, and he walked onto the bridge, and he had his little sack, and he said he's throwing it up, and they're making the most beautiful sounds. He said he looked down at the water, and at 30 below in my village, because that creek is glacier fed, it's not quite frozen over. It looks like glass. So he said he looked at his little objects, and he's like, what would happen if I dropped one of these in there? So he opened it up, and he dropped one in. And he said it made the most beautiful, little ping, and it made just barely a ripple. He's like, oh, that was fun. That was a cool sound. So he went and he repeated that, and he dropped every one of those shiny things into that water, and he heard one little ping and barely a ripple. And at the end, all he had left was his little sack, and he tucked it in his pocket, and he went to go do what he was supposed to do, and that's get firewood. So other than being like a really great story about how my uncle lost his marbles, it's a really great example of interventions and things that have come into our communities, but because there's no knowledge of the context and there's no knowledge of the people, it's a useless bag of marbles that get dropped into the bottom of a creek, barely making a ripple. And we have continued to see that, and that's one of the strengths of my organization is that we have dedicated ourselves to not being like that. And when we come to think about what is genetics research and how do we engage our communities in genetics research, how do we really know what they're wanting us to address, it all starts with community conversation. So a year and a half ago, I and some other of my staff, we went and we did an education module talking about biobanking. So biobanking is what everybody here has been talking about. It's actually once you take the samples and then you're storing them. Somebody had a really great picture of one of the freezers, I think it was in Alaska, where they store these samples in. A lot of people just don't know what that actually means, what kind of information they're gathering, how long they store the samples. So we wanted to take a look at an educational module. This was funded by the National Cancer Institute. And we went to 5 different communities throughout the U.S., and we talked to 206 American Indian and Alaska Native participants. And we did an educational module where in the very beginning, we gave them a survey asking about their knowledge and beliefs around biobanking. And at the end of that, we gave them another survey, the same one, to see exactly if there had been any further understanding of, or if our education module was actually working. So we did see a small but statistically significant increase, a 16% increase in knowledge overall, which was really great. We're actually working on this module to roll out a larger scale grant, use this as pilot data and roll out a larger scale so we can start doing the education in our communities. But I think one of the most telling things for me is 80% saw that there was a need for research. And this was at the first test before we even talked to them about it. And it was the same amount of people at the end. They want to participate in research. Our communities want to be part of preventing the health disparities that exist within our communities. But the lack of knowledge on exactly what we're doing and how it impacts our communities isn't there. One of the biggest concerns from those community members was control over what types of research would be conducted on their samples. So I'm very fortunate that it's administrative work, but I also make sure that I get to be on the ground as part of these. And I was sitting with one of the groups with an elder man who was suffering from both, he was in dialysis and he also had kidney cancer, another type of cancer. And he was talking about, he's like, yeah, I want to participate, but how do I know that if I give my sample that this is actually going to be directed towards research about Native people? How do I know that it will be actually cancer or research that looks at cancer? You know, it's those questions that we need to address, that we need to engage the community in so that they are a full reciprocal part of us just not bringing down initiatives from the federal government, bringing down initiatives from the universities. We really need to be in partnership with the communities because these are the questions that they have to be addressed. We conducted, after that project, we were like, this is something that we need to move forward on. And we actually conducted a survey with 300 participants representing 36 different tribal nations. And it was looking at, what was their willingness to participate in biobanking? So we had some really interesting findings. There really hasn't been anything, 300 surveys and working with American Indians and Alaska Natives is a lot of surveys. We haven't seen a lot of this happen, and we have gotten some very interesting data, and this is just preliminary. We haven't gone through all of the data that we have yet, but we're looking forward to doing that and putting out some papers and getting some more information out. But most people had a favorable attitude towards medical research. They wanted to participate in it. They knew that it was important for their health, for the health of the future generations. They identified research as critical. They know that it's a critical part of looking at their health. One of the interesting things is we had a subset of questions that ask, would you be willing to donate if it was a repository, a biobank repository that was controlled by the federal government? Would you participate if it was controlled by the Indian Health Service? Would you participate if it was controlled by a Native American organization or entity such as the Alaska Biobank that we heard about earlier? Predominantly, most of them were not willing to give samples if it was going to go into a repository that was controlled by the federal government. Definitely reflecting some of the history that we know about both the federal interactions in all scopes of Native people's lives, but also within the health fields. However, they were a significantly larger portion of people were interested in, they would be interested, and they would give samples if it was a Native American controlled biobank. So this is an idea that's out there that we're talking about where we need to have some future conversations. One of the other issues is we talked about in other questions talked about what would make you fearful or what would make you not want to participate? And one of the biggest ones is that they feared that medical researchers were presenting them with misleading information. That is misleading on the consent forms, it's misleading in what is going to happen with the research. So there's definitely a lot of things that a lot of us here who are both Native and non-Native allies who are working right now to think about how do we have those trustful, reciprocal relationships with the tribal communities so that we can rebuild that trust so that Native people are more willing to participate in this type of research. There was definitely a drop when we talked about what kind of samples were they willing to give. Most people were willing to give blood and saliva, but when we asked them questions about would they be willing to donate after death, and a majority of people said no. So this is very similar to another study that we have done on people's willingness to donate organs. Simply, for a lot of people, there's really a cultural context to when you pass away of wanting to go back to the Creator as a whole person. And so this is one of the areas that we're going to definitely need to consider, definitely has to be as part of the conversation, and we need to be talking to people about if they choose to donate after death, what does that look like, and what are their wishes and their choices? So, as everybody has been talking about, most people with our surveys, if they wanted to donate, they said they had to know what the intent of the research is. And that is a really hard thing to do when we talk about biobanking. You talked about the Alaska Biobank earlier. It's hard to say you're going to donate your specimen, it's going to be in this biobank for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. There's not a lot of options for people to say, well, I only want it to be for cancer research. So this is another conversation that we're having with people, that we're trying to figure out ways to overcome this obstacle, figure out maybe would they be more willing to donate if they didn't know the intent of the research, but it was a biobank that was controlled by a tribal entity. These are the questions that we're having right now that we need to continue to have. And so as we move forward with this, my organization's goal and my goal within this is that to ensure that we have those voices, that we are looking at the 7 generations of health. I had that as the title of my presentation, and I'm going to flip back here to my grandma. This is my grandma Katie John and my niece Te Ranga Moawawai. Her name is Rivers of Living Peace. And my grandma passed away a year ago at the age of 97. And I was so privileged and honored to spend time with her and to know her and to have been guided by the values that she's placed within me and within all of my relatives. When she passed away, there was over 250 children, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, and great-great-great-grandchildren, more than 250 of us there. And her legacy was, she always told us, you go and you get that white man's education. You be part of understanding what the systems are that are coming back into the community. But that does not mean that you lose your traditional values. You have a foot in each world. We listen to both the traditions of our ancestors. I am connected to those who have come before me, and I am connected to those who are going to be in front of me, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. And it is that interconnectedness with our cultural and our culture and our spirituality that informs the health of our future generations. So we have to be looking forward. We have to be looking back. We have to be tied. It all has to be tied together because there is such opportunity within genetics research. There is the opportunity to address breast cancer. I had when I was doing this survey on the willingness to participate in biobanking, it's one of my favorite things to do is to be there and sit and talk to people and go over the surveys and make sure they're consented properly. And after one of the surveys, a woman came up to me and she said, do you have time to talk? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to talk to you. So we go off in a corner. And she begins to tell me the story of her mother, and her daughter. So a grandmother, a daughter, and a granddaughter. And she tells me this story where all 3 of them had breast cancer at the same time. And we had about a half-hour conversation about just the experiences of the 3 of them going through this together. And we wept together, and we laughed together. And at the end of it, she said, if I had just known that I had the opportunity to donate from what was, taken from me during her mastectomy surgery, if it could just have one impact on my great-great-grandchild or just any Indian person, she's like, but I didn't know. And this is the point we're at right now. Our communities don't have the knowledge they have to make the informed decision. We have to ensure that the decision is informed, that we are looking at both the tribal regulations to control genetics research, to ensure that it's done in the right way. Looking at those urban Indian communities, making sure that when we do it with urban Indian communities, that we talk to the organizations who serve them. It's our responsibility to ensure that that community has the option to make a choice, yes or no. Because it's people like that woman who would have, because as she lived through that experience, it's an experience that she felt should not happen to anybody else. And if there's anything that she could have done, because her tribal upbringing, like mine, says that we look towards those future generations, that we make a change for those people, that they live a better life than we did. And that's what she wanted to have the opportunity to do, and she didn't. So that's the conclusion of my presentation with a picture. Somebody told me once it's not an Indian presentation unless it's full of your family. So this is my sister, and once again, my niece, Te Ranga Moawawai. And her name means, like I said before, Rivers of Living Peace. And her father is Maori from New Zealand. And in that tradition, the grandfathers named the first child. And so when he came back with this name, and my sister was explaining to us, he said when he prayed to the Creator about what is this grandchild going to be, what is the name that is going to shape this child, he was given that name, Te Ranga Moawawai. And my niece is now 7 years old, and she's wild, the wildest, most amazing kid ever. And when I talked to her, my sister said, she is at peace, because she has everything that she needs. She's able to just go and live her life wildly, loudly, but with respect for her elders and for her family. And that's what we're hoping for within all research and genetics research, is that we give our children that opportunity to have that full, healthy life where they're at peace, where they have the opportunity to make the choices of whether or not they wish to participate in research, whether or not they wish to serve in their community as health researchers or health storytellers. These are the opportunities that we want for our children, and genetics research is one way to do it. As long as we are ensuring that the tribes and the urban Indian organizations are part of that reciprocal partnership, that it is a bidirectional relationship, that we aren't imposing our thoughts, our will on them. So thank you.